Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Official Visit podcast. I am Tyson Alger. I am joined here in studio by Andrew Greif. Andrew, this is one of the first times we've done this together in the same room this summer, which happens to come during the last week of our summer. For many of you listening across the world, summer may just be getting going, but for us college football reporters, we're in the waning days of our vacation here as fall camp starts, and we're recording this on Tuesday. You'll listen to it on Wednesday, so essentially in 5 days here. Are you doing okay, Andrew?
It's a sad time, obviously, because I want to be soaking up the summer through Labor Day. But college football is not necessarily the worst gig in the world to have. We're going to be, covering a team that I think is always interesting year in and year out. This year, it's the are they going to take a step back? I just wrote a story. You read it about.
It was good.
Thank you. Is this the year that the Ducks, actually go back? Because last year was projected, and they did a little bit, but really for that kind of defense and that kind of quarterback uncertainty, it was, all things considered, a pretty good year.
Yeah.
So I think now the new thing is that, will Washington really jump them? So I think that's really interesting, and this team is always interesting, and that's all you can want in our jobs.
We're obviously going to get into this as we get into this podcast, but it just kind of popped up in my head that I think this is actually an incredible opportunity for Mark Helfrich this season, because I think a lot of people are waiting to see them slip up a little bit more, and if they happen to have like a 7 or 8 win season, and then there's going to be the calls for how come Helfrich can't do this, and like all that stuff that happened last year when they still won 9 games. But I think it's pretty universally believed this year that the Ducks have a lot of things going against them. There are a lot of factors from other teams of why Oregon could finish 3rd or 4th or whatever in the conference. But if the Ducks happen to put it all together, and let's say they put together a Pac-12 North winning season, all of a sudden that's Mark Helfrich doing that with all these factors and everything kind of going, and not like that the world's going against them, but I think he's got an opportunity to kind of cement his job status in fans' minds this season. I don't think his job status has ever really been up in the air in terms of reality, but
right.
But it's summer and fans like to gripe, and I think a lot of people have been like, oh, if the Ducks don't do it this year,
I've always been of the mind that the people in charge of making those decisions, the most influential donors, the brain trust, the Rob Mullins of the world, those people have a lot longer fuse than I think a lot of the fans who God bless them, comment on our stories and what on message boards, and they're the passionate folks. Not that the administrators aren't, but I think that there's more of a comfort with what Helfrich brings. We heard it here on this podcast, 4 weeks ago now, where I was talking to Paul Meyerberg, and I said, like, is this a step back? Is this the new normal for Oregon? And he made a good point that I fully agree with, that the business of competing for national championships is really tough, especially in Oregon's geographic area, with the kind of demographics playing against them. So if they're competing for conference titles every year, which Oregon still has the talent to do this year, then that's the achievement that Oregon should be going for. If they can be in position for that, that's the more realistic expectation. And once they slip out of that range, maybe that's when you get worried.
Right.
But I think they're still in the thick of it, despite the Pac-12 North poll.
I mean, they were a team that still got votes to win the Pac-12 this year. So I mean, it's not like Oregon has completely just slipped and is now in the realms of Colorado.
Right.
Like that's even ridiculous. But all right, so we're moving into fall camp. We're gonna have a ton of information coming out over the coming weeks, obviously leading up to the season opener against UC Davis on September 3rd. And then off to Nebraska the next week. Nope, Virginia at home the next week, then off to Nebraska. Obviously, you can tell I'm very ready for this season. But one of the things that you're kind of outlining in that story that you have coming out Sunday is just all of the kind of question marks that this team has coming into this season. They have a new defensive coordinator, a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, a new offensive line, a bunch of new pieces on the front seven, a secondary that was terrible last year but maybe more experienced this season. And all these are things that we are going to continue to write about. But if you were to pick one that you think is the most important to this team's success this year, what would you go with?
I've been giving some thought to this. I think that quarterback and defense are a 1A and 1B for me. I think that you can't get around that. Quarterback is the most important position on the whole team. Like I wrote about in the story, I don't want to give it away too much, but it's not. You can't just put in guys and expect immediate success every single year. I mean, that's the guys they've had quarterback. I think we get fooled by how easy they make it look. It's a really tough job.
I think in retrospect, all of this has made Darren Thomas look that much more impressive when, he was kind of an afterthought on those national title.
Even Brian Bennett, who was really good and just happened to lose out to a future Heisman Trophy winner. He was quite good.
Right.
They would have loved to have had him last season when Vernon Adams got hurt, for example, a guy like that. So I think that's the easy thing to do, but I think it's the right thing. It's defense and quarterback. So I would say Brady Hoke. I'll go with the defense because how he gets that defense to just be I don't think it's not right to say just be average, because I think they can be average, but they have to be better than last year. They can't be a complete liability on basically every drive.
Right.
I mean, it was so strange how they've always had this MO of forcing turnovers, kind of living on that fine edge of either you get the interception or it goes through your hands and the guy gets an 80-yard touchdown. That's kind of what you always expect, but they always seem to get those picks. Like Eric Dargan always got those picks in EFO. So when they lost that, and teams weren't afraid to pass, I really want to see how he instills confidence in the defense, because I really do think the talent is there, but they had to play confidently, and there was just no confidence last year. I mean, you could see it when TCU started making like 4 good plays in a row with their backup quarterback in the Alamo Bowl. You could just see everything spoiling up. I mean, not spoiling, but coming apart at the seams in that bowl game. So that's my answer.
I kind of agree with you there too, because quarterback's a really easy one to pick, because if you look, and if Vernon Adams was healthy all last season, they probably are in contention for a Pac-12 title. Mm-hmm. But let's say the defense is just a touchdown better than it. And granted, that's actually a pretty decent improvement, at 7-point swing and points allowed. But they beat Michigan State. They beat Washington State. They win the Alamo Bowl. That's 3 extra wins by just improving upon like a score a game,
right.
Which I don't think anyone's expecting Oregon's defense to come in here and all of a sudden be like Stanford's in its prime or anything. But if you can just get back to league average, they win some of those games last year that they lost because a different quarterback was in. In other words, so the offense wasn't able to score 50 points a game when Vernon Adams was out last season. The defense could have helped them, and you never really saw that last year. So I do think that's going to be a big key, because I think overall the quarterback situation is going to be better than it was a year ago.
I think they're deeper.
I don't think Dakota Prukop is as good as Vernon Adams, but I do think the basement is way higher than it was last year with Jeff Locke and Taylor Alley. No offense to those guys in the cutthroat world of college football. I think a lot of people give them a little bit too much flack, but inside the program, they're very well revered.
Oh, absolutely. I think you put it pretty well there. So a sneaky way that I think Oregon must get better this year, is special teams. They were always so good on special teams.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ever since Tom Osborne returned from Arizona State, they've been probably almost peerless in the country in terms of containing kickoff returners, punt returners. They didn't allow, I believe, a punt return since 2007 for a touchdown, and I believe a kickoff return since 2006.
And then Utah happened.
Yeah. I was looking at this. I was looking for a special teams story last week, thinking about it, and
God,
I didn't actually write the story.
What were you doing last weekend?
I didn't actually write the story, but I'll save it for later. But it was like, how do you write about special teams? Because the kicker is solid, Aiden Schneider.
Mm-hmm.
The punter, Ian Wheeler, is at least experienced.
Right.
He could be. It's not always his fault.
Kickoffs are a mute point because
Matt Wogan is good at those, and obviously the moved up kickoff line has helped. But my God, was kick and punt coverage really abysmal last year.
Yeah.
And it was just so strange. I don't know why. I mean, Tom Osborne said that a lot of young players were forced into that role, but they've always had a lot of young players, I think, squish in and out. So, I mean, I'm just looking at their net punting last year, 31.8 yards per punt net.
Yuck.
That's 126th in the country. They ranked 127 teams.
Yeah.
Last season.
And that just compounds things, because they do that, and then in your story also coming up, you mentioned Oregon's red zone defense efficiency. That means you're only a couple plays away from the red zone, and I mean everything just kind of piles up there.
Yeah, punt return defense, they allowed 15.2 yards. That's 124th in the country. Let me look up kicks real quick. Kickoff return defense was 86th. I mean, it's just that when you have a defense, you need to keep opposing offenses as far away from the end zone as possible, and giving up, a couple extra yards on punts and maybe 5 extra yards on kickoffs than you're used to goes a huge way. I mean, against Washington State, didn't they score that game-tying touchdown with 1 second left on the clock?
Right.
That's
or even in the season that they went to, and this is going back to like when things were working for him, but like in the national title season with Mariota, how many times did that defense get to the bend but don't break part? Right. But if you're 5 extra yards downfield, that break might be a touchdown.
I think that's something that it's never like the sexiest headline, because special teams, there's so many different.
I'd click.
You would?
Yeah.
Okay, well then I'll write something about that.
Well, just Tom Osborne's usually a pretty good quote.
That's a really good point. I did appreciate last year after the Utah game that we talked about.
Yeah, I love this one.
He said that was the greatest play he'd ever seen on special teams pulled off in a game, and he'd been coaching for, I think, since 1988 at Portland State. I mean, he's seen it all. I appreciated that candor, but he also was like, we didn't do anything wrong. We just we got completely housed by the best executed play I've ever seen. I'm
trying to remember when that play happened. Did you know what was happening as it was happening, or was it kind of like when you're watching on TV and the cameramen are tricked into like covering? I don't remember if I saw it straight up at first.
I think I remember watching Devin Allen, the gunner, go down and try to get the punt returner, the proper punt returner, and then immediately thought that's not right.
Right.
Osborne said on that play that he saw the second gunner coverer, kind of like cornerback position, kind of drift off, and he was like, no, what's he doing? And then he said like 5 seconds later, not 5 seconds, like 2 seconds later, he realized, oh no, they're going to fake it. But as he said, it was too loud, he couldn't communicate it. Who knows where the breakdown really happened, but it was kind of a delayed reaction for me too.
I think that game in general last year is like the biggest blur of a game that I have from last year in terms of trying to remember anything other than that punt play.
Right.
That was just a bad game for Oregon.
Right.
The Colorado game last year was I don't remember much from that one either, other than the fact that they alternated between Lockie and Alley the whole game.
And Braylon Addison.
Oh, didn't he throw a touchdown pass? Yeah, it was the best throw of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they ran the ball like crazy the fourth quarter and got out of there with a win by lightning strikes. So if you guys haven't completely left the podcast by now, as we just reminisce over our poor memories.
Right. Do you remember when?
I really am looking forward to the season. I think that it's going to be just fascinating, and I don't think it's for the average fan. It's going to be like it's going to give you this warm, fuzzy feeling every week because you just know, like in 2014, that Oregon was going to pretty much mow down people. But I just think there's some drama with Oregon every year, and this year it's going to be a lot like last year. Week to week, you're never quite sure which team you might see.
I agree there. I think I think one of the more interesting things about Oregon not being that top level of elite is you're going to go into weeks and not just know that Oregon's going to win by 50 or 60 points. Yeah. And I think this year, at least you might have some. I think the games are going to be closer in general this season than they were last year, whether they're winning them or losing them. Because last year, Oregon's top end was incredible when Vernon was just pumping the ball and everything was working. But then obviously their bottom was pretty poor.
Yes.
So I don't know. I think it could be a pretty fun season.
One of the stories I'm writing about later this week is how 7th straight year all of Oregon's recruits and newcomers, I should say, because this is including the Dakota Prukops and Zach Morgans of the world. They're all in school, enrolled. That's a pretty remarkable accomplishment. But it makes me wonder, which of those 20 will play earliest or have the best shot. I think Dylan Mitchell maybe is the front runner there, the obvious front runner.
It's especially after Kirk Merritt's transfer too. Yeah. I think Mitchell's all but wrapped up a non-redshirt season as much as you can going into the fall.
But when you
who else do we got here?
Well, let's look here. So for class, I'm going to go down, and I would think that that is I think Tristan Wallace actually might be interesting to watch. He's a wide receiver, the former quarterback guy that is really highly regarded out of Texas, who flipped from Ohio State. I just think he's a different kind of receiver that I think they might try to get him in to the game a little differently than the kind of longer, leaner, more wiry Aaron Carrington's. He's a big guy.
Yeah, I was about to say he's one of the only guys in that Oregon system that actually has some size. What is he, 6'4", 235?
Yeah. I mean, he's a load.
I mean, Dwayne Stanford's pretty tall, but Dwayne Stanford's not all that thick.
Right.
I just think it's very hard to break into Oregon's receiving core right now, especially if you're already thinking that Dylan Mitchell is not going to. Granted, Dylan Mitchell, I think, can do some other things than a 6'4" guy can do, but I think you might see some guys on the defensive side of the ball play.
That's the smarter play. And I wasn't around for spring. That's my caveat, but I think about a guy like Troy Dye or Darian Franklin, who Franklin is definitely a downhill linebacker. Dye, I think, can float between maybe a linebacker or an oversized safety, smaller linebacker, oversized safety. But I don't know. I think I like Franklin or maybe even Hunter Campmoyer, who they seem like guys who, when I remember Helfrich's talking about them on signing day, they just kind of had this college-ready body. It seemed like there was something about the way he spoke about them that I thought left me thinking, hey, these guys, he thinks they're special.
Well, if there's a year to have a true freshman play on defense this year too, it's going to be this year when you've lost 6 or 7 starters from the front 7. You have a new defensive coordinator who has made a point of saying that he's judging everyone from square one. So there's going to be no kind of preconceived, this guy's playing here, this guy's playing there. I think it's hard to gauge, and it will be hard for us to gauge throughout the fall how that's going, because if there's one thing Brady Hoke doesn't do, it's entertain questions of, hey, how's player X looking? Brady Hoke doesn't really do that unless it's, just a random day where you catch him well. But
though Don Pelham didn't really do that either.
Correct, true. You'd have to look at the tape first.
Stock response, yeah.
Stock response. Then again, I guess in that linebacking core, you do have Don Pelham back in there, so it is a guy who's familiar with some of the guys that are in that system too. So, one of the guys that I'm just interested in seeing how he does this year is Danny Mattingly. You got a guy who was a pretty heralded recruit coming out, and what is this now, his 3rd year?
I believe it's his 4th.
Yeah, redshirt junior year, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so a guy who's, I think, maybe flashed at times. By at times, I mean like maybe once every 9 games or so. But, he's got good linebacking size. I think when I talked to him this spring, he was excited about the switch to the 4-3. I think that's what a lot of the guys played more primarily when they were coming out of high school. And I think the battle between him and like A.J. Hotchkins is going to be a good one at middle linebacker.
Canton Kamatule is I think if you're projecting the front 4, you look at Henry Mondo. Is it? Mondo. Sorry.
It's that
E-A-U-X. Yeah.
Ugh.
So we got Henry Mond.
It's all you.
He's definitely a great end. He'll fit into like DeForest Buckner's spot, for example. Next to him, I think you've got some mixture of a Austin Malawada or potentially a Rex Manu, Gary Baker, who's a freshman who started in the spring game. I think Drayton Carlberg has gotten a lot of publicity and a lot of good praise from coaches. At least that's what it seemed like. He started, and I think that requires a certain amount of aptitude. And then on the outside, you might have maybe one of those hybrid guys, maybe a Trodney Prevost, or I think maybe a Jonah Moy too.
Yeah.
But where in there Canton fits, the former 5-star recruit, I think he could play both inside or outside. But just with this huge body, I almost wonder if he's more fit for the inside. But he has all the talent in the world. Where does that apply itself this year, though? That's the question. He also got hurt last year.
Yeah, I think honestly that was the thing that kind of, he was banged up a little bit this spring too, so he wasn't able to make like a quick impression with Brady Hoke. I don't know. I think he's kind of I think at this point, Kamatule is kind of just like a bonus. I think they may be preparing to play I'm not saying they're preparing to play without him, but it's I don't think anyone would be surprised if he's not starting. But if he happens to get in there, if he happens to show some of that, I mean, he was like their biggest defensive recruit they've had on the defensive line since Buckner.
Since Eric Armstead and DeForest Buckner, but definitely Armstead was the more.
Yeah, because I think everyone kind of figured he fit that same mold, and obviously those guys ended up. I mean, Buckner was way more consistent in his college career than Armstead was, but both of them were very effective players. And it just seems like it's been a while since Oregon's kind of had instability on that defensive line.
Yeah. Well, I remember the 2013 season where they got ran over a bunch in the last few weeks, but ever since then...
Which was crazy, because if you go back and look at that, you have 2 first-round draft picks on that line.
Yeah. But they were also sophomores that year.
Yeah. Wait, 2013. Oh, 2013. I guess 2013. I was thinking 14.
So, one question I thought, there's been the question about pressure this year. Kind of a make or break, not make or break, but it's a very important year for Helfrich. We talked about this. And the staff. I kind of wonder, though, those guys have been through the really terrible years of Oregon football, the Gary Campbells, Steve Greatwoods. I wonder if they really at all feel pressure, because I think they still know that they have a different class of player. And yes, the Pac-12 has gotten much better, and the North is, I think, stronger than the South. But I just wonder if they just kind of laugh that stuff off, because they've seen so much worse, and the guys they get to mold now, and the place they get to do it at in these facilities, right. I think just they have so many more advantages, and they managed to do it before. I just wonder if it even kind of popped in on the periphery of their thoughts, because maybe Helfrich, he's the head coach, but right. I just really don't know how much it really even penetrates the little bubble that they get to live inside the HTC. I don't think it does.
That's a really good kind of thing to bring up, because I think it's a little bit of a trickier question than that, because a lot of those guys, like you said, have been through like the lean years, but also there's a lot more money in this program now in these years within the last 10 years than there were back in the 80s and 90s when these guys were kind of beginning their careers with Oregon. I think you can maybe look and granted, it was a much more higher profile position, but like Don Pelham last year, maybe he had that mindset of, there's not a whole lot of pressure on this, and then, it doesn't work and it gets demoted. That was a Helfrich call, though, and Helfrich isn't a guy who was here during the lean years. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a tricky thing, because I think going through those lean years kind of seasoned those coaches to know like not to overreact to certain things or freak out about what else. But also I think it's kind of hard to compare the program now to what it was in the even pre-95, 94.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to put it, is that it seasoned them, but it doesn't leave them unaware that the stakes
Correct.
that are riding on what's happening now,
What were their contracts back in the 90s? Like back then?
Oh, I don't know. Let's put it this way. I remember, Mark Helfrich is...
So basically, the average Oregon positional coach right now is probably making around $250 to $300.
Right.
Helfrich is making $1 million, right?
He's making $3.5.
And then Hoke's only making like $200 this year, and then it ratchets up to like $800, doesn't it?
It's in that neighborhood,
right.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm just curious to what like the average positional coach was making 20 years ago.
Well, what I was going to say was that Mark Helfrich's high school coach, Kent Weigel,
Mm-hmm.
Marshfield High School, when I went down to talk to him about Helfrich before Helfrich's first year, he told me how he had a chance to coach at Oregon State in the 70s. He had won, in the late 70s, he'd won a ton of games at a high school in the Roseburg area, was really playing well. I mean, a coach on the rise,
Mm-hmm.
really well respected. And he got offered a job, he said, as a position coach at Oregon State, and turned it down because he was making more money as a teacher at a small Roseburg area high school. So I mean, that's kind of
Roseburg's loaded, man.
Where it's come. Well, this wasn't Roseburg High School. This was South Umpqua High School. So this is where it's kind of come from. So yeah, there's the stakes for you.
Can you give us a glimpse into what you think you're going to write for Monday on Media Day, or what you're interested in?
I'm interested
without showing all of your cards.
I'm interested in the defense. I'll go back to the defense.
Right.
Writing something about the defense. I just think that how they approach this year, confidence-wise, is going to be key.
I like that.
What about you?
I kind of want to talk to some of the guys that have. Oregon had so many that that 2014 national title appearance team had a very big mix of young and old players. And I'm interested in just talking to some of the guys who were younger players on that team who are now the veterans on this team. Maybe your Tyrell Crosbys, maybe your Henry Mondoos, and just what's it like to go from beginning in that to there's almost more questions for them in their veteran years now than there were when they were younger. With so many changes, does this still feel like the same kind of Oregon program as it was back then? And I don't know how much, Mondou and Crosby both don't talk a whole lot, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a fascinating next 4 weeks of fall camp. They'll name the starting quarterback. If they do it as they did in the past, the week before the game, probably that Friday or Saturday. Probably that Friday, which means we'll have availability on Saturday, talk to Helfrich about it. That's when unless someone just goes crazy.
But didn't they wait until actual game week last year?
I thought it was Friday or Saturday.
I feel like it leaked, and then
it didn't.
Maybe. Whatever.
I remember where I was. I was in the car driving to get my parking permit at my apartment, and I was stuck in traffic when it came across. So I was late getting back to my house. So that's where I remember it being.
All right, you're right.
We can go back to this and look at the date in the archives.
Yeah, maybe we can listen to last year's official visit podcast and see what you had to say about it then.
Speaking of, we'd love if you listen to some more of these and even rated us on iTunes. You can find us there, download us through all your favorite podcasting apps, or we have it on the website every time we post.
If I wanted to read your stuff, where can I find it?
You can find it the same place you can find the podcast, which by now you should know is OregonLive.com/ducks. And if I wanted to read your tweets, where would I find those, Tyson?
You read them at Tyson Alger. I believe you're at Andrew Greif. Hey, and guess what, guys? Next week, we don't have to waste your time talking about what we think is going to happen during fall camp. Fall camp is here. Join us on the visit, the official visit.